Hello and welcome to the Joe Ligato Show. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Ligato, and today we're going to be answering a question from our audience on what are some examples of China's efforts to secure stable natural resource partners and reduce its reliance on the US and its allies. And really, the first one, and this is probably the key element, is China's Belt and Road Initiative. They're trying to make sure that they have both land and sea routes that they can take in order to trade goods and resources with other countries. So China typically will be getting a lot of natural resources from other countries, Pakistan, India, various Central Asian republics. I believe the Belt and Road Initiative goes all the way to Italy. And so all throughout the Middle East, they'll be getting various resources. They will be having a lot of sea-based routes, so places like Indonesia, they'll be getting resources from. And China will be sending along various manufactured goods in exchange for those resources. So China has done an excellent job of making sure that it has various routes in order to receive resources and send out goods. And that's been one of China's primary efforts to secure stable natural resource partners across a variety of different nations. Any one of these small nations probably wouldn't have been valuable on its own, or I shouldn't say valuable on its own, but it wouldn't have been enough on its own for China to secure those natural resources. But if they're building an entire land and sea-based routes in order to have access to these resources, it's valuable because you get a lot of different countries, a lot of smaller countries on board, which may not have access to larger countries in order to get goods very rapidly. Next up, what are some examples of China's efforts to secure stable natural resource partners and reduce its reliance on the US and its allies? Well, the Belt and Road Initiative doesn't particularly include places like Latin America because of how far away it is, obviously. However, China has managed to secure rare resources from Latin America, things like lithium for batteries. They've managed to be competitive with the United States in order to secure these resources. And really, what they had to do in exchange for that was make sure to help stabilize those countries, do various infrastructure projects there. See, the thing is, the United States came in and they extracted resources through destabilizing the countries, making sure that the populace was not able to maintain access to various resources. And that's why the United States doesn't like countries like Venezuela, which nationalizes things like their oil reserves so that the United States can't just exploit the populace and extract these resources. And so China is coming in with a completely different strategy of stabilizing countries, literally the complete opposite, in order to make trade deals with these countries for their rare resources. And obviously, the populaces of these countries are more receptive to China's model of securing and stabilizing their nations in order to have access to the resources versus the United States model of just kind of distracting, causing chaos for the people in order to extract their resources. And so China has been very competitive, even outside of the Belt and Road Initiative, in countries like Latin America when it comes to securing natural resources. Another example of China's efforts to secure stable natural resources partners and reduce its reliance on the US and its allies is getting rare resources in Africa. So Africa has its former countries that were controlled by colonial powers. And even after colonial times, these countries were exploited. The borders between various countries were pretty arbitrarily decided by former colonial powers, and it's caused a lot of tension within these countries. And so the former colonial powers, such as the United Kingdom, France, the United States, have used the various tensions, various problems within these countries in order to further extract resources. And so, like Latin America, the United States has been destabilizing various countries, putting in pro-American dictators, etc., in order to get access to these natural resources. And so China is coming in with various infrastructure projects, and they are able to be competitive for Africa's natural resources. One, because of the fact that they don't have the historical tensions, historical animosities with African nations because they're not a colonial power, former colonial power. And Two, just because of the fact that they are coming in and building these various infrastructure projects, and they're not lecturing the country. And I didn't talk about this overly much with Latin America, but United States and various other former colonial powers like to go into African nations and lecture them about how they should run their countries. They talk about various cultural practices that African nations have that they say they shouldn't have. They shouldn't act in certain ways. And so any aid, the United States does send a lot of aid to Africa, but any aid that is sent to African nations is tied to these moral requirements. You have to act in a certain way. And so African nations do not like that. They do not like to be dictated to about how they should act, how they should grow as a nation. And so China's coming in willing to have these products and saying these projects, various infrastructure projects, and saying, well, listen, you know best how to run your own country, and we're going to leave you to it. We just want to have these trade deals, these win-win cooperations with your country. And African nations love that because they're allowed autonomy, they're allowed agency, they're allowed sovereignty. Whereas whenever the West comes in and dictates terms and lectures, that takes away the people and their country's sense of agency, sense of autonomy, sense of sovereignty. And so China just has a very competitive offer, and because of that, they're able to extract rare resources needed for things like the production of electric vehicles from African nations. They're able to get those resources in exchange for what are obviously better trade deals than what the West is able to offer, because the African nations are taking those trade deals versus taking the trade deals with Western nations. And the last part that we have to go over here, so an example of China's efforts to secure stable natural resources partners and reduce its reliance on the US and its allies. Obviously, we have to talk about Russia. Russia is the big partner for China, and people typically talk about Russia as kind of the little brother to China, the more subservient partner, but I really do not think that's the case. Aside from things like the historical ties that Russia has with other nations that China benefits from, and aside from the safe, stable northern border, which China loves having so they can focus on the South China Sea, Russia also offers something that other nations really can't offer, or can't offer in as much of an abundance, which is natural resources. Russia is the most natural resource rich country in the world, and it's a lot easier to have a one-on-one deal versus getting the equivalent amount of resources from many deals with many smaller countries. And so having one primary kind of trade partner that is a resource-rich nation is extremely beneficial for China, because they're able to get a lot of resources that they otherwise would have to deal with maybe dozens of other nations in order to get that same amount of resources. And so this relationship, this partnership between Russia and China has been of historical significance. I would go so far as to say that within the last 100 years, I would go so far as to call an alliance between Russia and China this is the most important alliance of the past 100 years, is how I would put it. I've been saying that for years now. I've been monitoring the situation, and it's very clear that both of those nations and both of the governments of those nations really highly respect the other, and they understand the significance, the importance of the other's not only stability, but their growth, because they're mutually dependent to a very large extent. And so these are various efforts that China has made to secure natural resource partners and reduce its reliance on the US and its allies. And I think between things like the Belt and Road Initiative and the various trade deals that China has with Latin America and Africa, and its very close partnership, alliance, symbiotic relationship, we could call it, with Russia, makes it so that China is a lot less reliant on the United States than the United States is reliant on China. So, like, China is in a very, very, very good position, and that's why in other videos I've talked about how I believe that United States is the one that is primarily fomenting tension and manufacturing consent for war, because they need a war with China far more than China needs it. China, they can sit back and they will be very successful given all the current efforts, all the current fruits of their labor for the projects, the agreements that they've been putting into place. So If you liked my answer to this question, please actually like the video. And if you want to hear more content from me, please subscribe to our channel. And if you have any comments, questions, concerns, I read all of the comments in the comment box. So please say whatever you'd like. I can't wait to hear from you. And thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye.